All right, guys, so this is the fourth take of this update. Trying to make it a little bit better for you guys. I know that previous videos have been kind of bland, and they probably still are kind of bland, but I want to go into changes I've made with what we're doing with the car. I have a tripod now, and I have a mic now. Maybe you can't hear me breathing so hard because I'm old and fat, but I want to kind of go into what we did. I know it looks like we made a lot of progress with the car. I'd like to say it was mounted in there, but it's not. But we have made a little bit of progress with the car, and I kind of want to go over it with you, kind of explain what I've seen, what we're fighting, and what we plan to do on the next go around. So I do all my stuff, I guess, one take, maybe four takes if it takes that, but I don't like video editing. This is all kind of raw footage, so it is what it is. But anyways, uh, motor's in the car. It is not exactly where it needs to go. It needs to go about another 2 to 3 inches back. And reason being is that the CV angles in this thing right now are not great. So we are trying to get the motor back as far as possible to get the front diff around about where the factory location was on the DSM unit. Sorry, the Eagle Talon unit. But we are trying to get it further back, and there's a couple things that are blocking us from doing that right now. I don't know if you can see this. It's not great footage, but I guess the rear subframe is not cut for this, obviously. What we are going to have to do is make clearance for that. The worst part is that this peak in the back is great. Boop. That's great. That's not bad, but the problem is it curves down here and goes down this side. And the worst part about it is it would be nothing to cut that out and make room for it, but the factory front sway bar is right behind that, and it does follow that curve. So what I'm coming to the realization is that I either have to lower the motor in the car, which I really don't want to do because it's going to put the oil pan at a pretty low plane, is that the only other option is to cut that and then eliminate the front sway bar, which I'm not too excited about. Granted, this car was never meant to go around corners, but also I'd kind of like to have a front sway bar on this thing. So a little bit concerned about that. If it comes down to it, I would give up the front sway bar just to have a K24 and a DSM, and I think that's the route we're going to go. But I'm going to try to retain it if I can. I want to kind of see if I can lower the motor a little bit and see if that solves that problem, but I'm really not thinking that it's going to. So that's where we're at on it. The other thing is, these are the mounts. This is the driver's side mount. It's not exactly where it needs to go, but this piece bolts the transmission. It's going to go more so to the driver's side. The idea here is to weld these tabs, modify them obviously down, and then weld them to the frame rail. I say weld them to the frame rail. I really don't want to weld them to the frame rail. I would like to weld them to a piece of plate that ties the front and rear tab to each other with a plate here and a plate down that can be bolted in. I would like to be able to remove this if I have to pull the engine. I don't want to have to fight it to get it out one side or the other, even though I think that if we remove this and remove this, it would still come out no problem, but I want to be able to take the motor out the top if I have to. And I feel like welding this to the frame rail, the factory frame rail, they're pretty thin. So I want to have some sort of gusset or brace that bolts into it. I'd rather that than just weld it to the actual frame rail. So that's that side. We did look at using the factory mount with like a Honda Accord mount that's actually taller than this to get this bolt in here, but I don't think there's going to be enough room or enough travel to get this where I need it and still have the engine where I want it. So I think that this, as much as I don't want to admit it, the factory driver's side mount is going to have to go, and I have kind of a moral dilemma with that, I guess you could say. And the fact is that once I start doing that and modifying the rear subframe, I am fully committed to putting a Honda motor in my DSM. Up until this point, it has been fairly easy to be like, oh, we're gonna do it, we're gonna bolt it in, we're gonna see what it falls, how it lines up, if everything works. But when you start cutting stuff like this out of the frame, it becomes reality. It becomes a situation where you can't turn back. So that's what I'm worried about. I haven't cut anything off this car currently to where I couldn't put a 4G back in it, but we are pretty much to that point where we need to commit and make a choice as to, hey, this is going to work or not. And I feel like I've done enough dry fits to understand that this is a pretty legit idea. It was just kind of all smoke and mirrors up until this point, but I think it is a legit idea. I think it's going to work. I think that we need to do it. I think this is going to happen. So that's the next step. Cut those out, modify the rear subframe, see if this thing fits, or make it fit where it needs to fit, I guess, at that point. Passenger side, everything fits on this side. It does clear the frame rail, barely, no worse than a DSM. If you've ever done water pump bolts on a DSM, you know that they are stupid tight up against the driver's side frame rail. So this is just another day in the DSM community. So a little bit different. We do have the passenger mount. Sorry, picking stuff off the ground. Passenger side mount is here. What I realized with this is this tab here, obviously I've got to modify that to fit the frame rail, but if I move this engine back another 2 inches, we're going to run into an issue where the back side of this mount right here hits the frame rail when it goes back. So we're going to have to make clearance for that. I think instead of going and modifying the frame rail, what I'm going to do is run some sort of, I have another stud that came off the transmission that'll bolt in here, but what I can do is, God, this is horrible. Hang on, let me see if I can get a better angle. So what I can do is run a spacer between the CRV mount and the Hasport kit to space this up to eliminate some motor mounts hitting the frame rail. I think that's the best case here. The other thing is, if you look here, EGs don't have this. This is going to have to be modified somewhere around here to allow clearance for that motor mount to slide back. So that's the goal. Same thing on the other side as this side. I would like to run a plate across the top of the frame rail and down the side of the frame rail to mount those tabs on, weld those tabs on to where it is removable. I don't think it's going to be as bad on this side because this mount is going to be pretty much straight up and down, as where the driver's side is going to hang over into the engine bay a little bit whenever you finally get it all mounted up. So we'll see. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. Worst case is I weld them in solid. I take the motor out of the bottom, which is how this thing should probably go anyways. But that is what it is. What else? Oh, CRV diff. I don't know if you guys follow a lot of Honda stuff, but this is a diff I have out of the Element. I don't know what I want to do with this yet. So big thing now, or a not so popular thing now, actually, I think it's just on the forefront of coming into popularity, is these diffs were utilized because they're Honda and they work, right? You have to run a clutch pack in the front, but you can make them work with the Highlander viscous. And the new thing that just came out, I don't know if I mentioned it in my other videos, but the new thing that just came out is you can use a Jaguar X-Type rear diff. It actually has the same ratio as the Honda transmission, so it is compatible with everything else. It is a much stronger rear diff. You can do Wago stuff or wagon stuff, Civic wagon stuff, but they are extremely hard to find and they're very, very expensive when you get them. But the Jaguar stuff is the same ratio. It is a much more compact unit. It doesn't have the clutch pack in the front of it, and it actually has better axles that come out the side. So I don't know if I'm going to use this thing, which is the whole purpose in buying the Element, was to have all this cool stuff. But I don't know if I'm going to use the rear diff on this or find a Jaguar rear diff. I think you can get them for fairly cheap now, but I think that's going to change in the future whenever the Honda community really finds out what's going on with them and what they can be used for, especially since S1 has come out with a conversion kit to mount it to their rear subframe, and I think it's EGs, EKs, and it's just a matter of time before they have a rear mount kit for that diff in every Honda that you want to all-wheel drive. So my thought process is, if I'm going to modify the rear subframe anyway, I might as well modify it to something that is much stronger than this. And the rear axles on the CRV and Element are pretty skinny. Like I said before, that these all-wheel drive kits are fairly front-wheel drive with rear assist, and I want to be able to put enough power to the rear end, whether that's changing fluid in the rear or in the viscous to make it more rear drive than factory Freelander viscous is. I want to make sure that I can put enough power to the rear wheels to where it's more all-wheel drive than front-wheel drive with rear assist, because you'll even see nowadays, you'll see front-wheel drive Honda Civics with big slicks on the front and then slicks on the back, but for the most part, they act and handle like a front-wheel drive car that gets out of the hole better. So I would like to have a much more 50-50 ratio front to rear. I think it would be better for this car. I think that that's primarily what this car was to begin with. And I think that potentially a Jaguar rear diff, since I've got to make axles anyway, and a drive shaft anyway, and mount it anyway, might as well do that instead of putting the CRV stuff in the back of it, or Honda Element stuff in the back of it. So that's where we're at on the car. I don't know if I went into it, but I am able to retain the driver's side support here underneath the transmission and the front rail here. I do have to remove the front motor mount on the DSM stuff just to make clearance, but also if I move the engine 2 inches back, that might not be a clearance issue, but it kind of just looks like shit. So we're trying to avoid that. The update on the other car is, or I guess the surprise that I had for Alex, was the EG is at the parents' house. We did go to a junkyard and cut the entire front end off an EG because mine has some left hand frame damage. It's not that bad. It's actually, well, use this car for reference. It's actually between here, the motor mount, and the front frame rail. The biggest concern is that it was patched at some point in time back behind it. Not this car, but the EG. So I want to go back in and see if I can make it straight before we do anything crazy to it. I don't know exactly how I want to proceed with that thing. It does need a front core support in it, which also came with the front end. So at the bare minimum, we'll make sure the frame rails are straight, and we will put the factory core support back in it just to make sure that it looks factory. I want it to look factory. I might do a bolt-in front core support on the car just because that motor might come in and out of it every once in a while, and it'd be a hell of a lot easier to pull it out with a bolting core support. So if I'm there anyway, I might as well do it. Anyways, that's the update on the car. Don't let the turbo manifold fool you. I'll just have it on there to check the clearances, make sure everything's going to work, because at one point in time, this car will have a turbo on it. I don't know if it's going to be right out of the gate or if it's going to be NA for a while, but I guess we will find out. Still got to figure out what electronics I want to run in the car. Not real sure how we're going to tie it into the chassis harness, but I don't think it's going to be that difficult. Actually, that's probably the easiest part of this whole project if I'm looking back on it, which I thought was going to be the worst part of it. But Honda stuff, and the more I take the wiring harness out of this DSM, it's not that bad. So I guess until next time, like I said, that's a brief update. I hope everything's as you expected. We haven't made a whole lot of progress on it, but at least the motor's sitting in the engine bay, and we are taking one step forward, right? That's all it is. We're trying to make a little bit of effort here and there to make sure that this thing goes into it. And I guess I will see you on the next update, and stay tuned.